Good evening to you all, whether you're watching this recording. We're really glad you're here. I'm Bev Doubling. I work for a church in the centre of Norwich called Surrey Chapel for this evening. Well, tonight is the second in a three-part series of webinars called On Your Mind, where we're exploring three different issues that we know have been increasingly felt since lockdown. So that's anxiety, money worries, and depression. And of course, for some of us, they're things that we have lived with for a very long time. For each of our events, we've invited guest speakers who have some experience of the issue, some expertise to share, but all of them believe that the God of the Bible knows our suffering and can speak into it and offer hope. If you missed last week, biblical counsellor Helen Thorne spoke to us on anxiety, and that has been recorded and is now on YouTube, so you can find that on the Surrey Chapel YouTube channel. And also any other information about this series is on our website if you check www.surreychapel.org.uk, and that address will be coming up in the chat column any moment now. And just to remind you too, this webinar is being recorded, so it should come out in the next couple of days. If you want to watch it again or share it with others, you might be comforted to know that only the faces of the speakers will come up on that recording. So tonight we're looking at money worries, and of course it's particularly topical at the moment as many people are facing job insecurity. I read about research at the University of Essex which says that 6.5 million jobs could be lost in the UK due to the economic fallout from coronavirus lockdown. So that's about a quarter of the UK's total jobs. So it is truly a crisis, isn't it? But as I said, many of us here will have been living with that crisis for a long time, perhaps with the daily stress of debt. So one of the people who helped us make the trailer for this series said, money worries are like a black hole and it feels like there is no way out of it. You fear answering the door because you always think it's the bailiffs. You can't sleep because you think about it all the time. And if you sleep, it's your first waking thought. Well, it may be that you're listening tonight and you're feeling that, or you're supporting someone who's feeling that. But whoever you are, we are really glad you're with us, and we hope that you find some hope in what is said. So shortly I'm going to introduce you to our guest speaker, who is John Brown tonight. John is going to speak to us. Then we've got the opportunity to ask him questions. And then we have another guest called Julia Morrish, who is the Centre Manager in Norwich for Christians Against Poverty, which is a charity. And she's going to help us see what help we can access if we are struggling financially and are in debt. And then there's going to be an opportunity for further questions after that. And if you were here last week, you'll know that rather than speaking out those questions, we're using the chat function again, or there will be a phone number that will come up on the chat column, and you can text that phone number and the questions will come through to me. Well, it's my great pleasure to introduce John. So perhaps, John, you could unmute yourself. John is a pastor of a church in Norwich called Servants Church, and in ordinary times that church meets right next door to the campus of the University of East Anglia. In a little bit about yourself and your family, so we can get to know you.
Yeah, well, it's really great to be here. As you can tell from my accent, I'm not originally from Norfolk, a little farther away than that. But I am happily married almost 29 years in August to Sarah. And we have 5 amazing kids from 27 down to 19, all of whom for some reason are still in university. We want them to learn to finish, and move on, but they're still all in university. So. Or getting ready to go into university. So, but no, I'm really blessed to have all of them.
Wonderful. Tell us, what's it been like living as an American in the UK or in Norwich?
Some things have been amazing, especially Norwich. Norwich is just an amazing city. It's I'm happy to live here the rest of my life. I think I didn't really know what chips were until I moved to this country, because those things we call French fries in America are just absolute rubbish. And so I'm really enjoying proper chips. I have to say that probably the most challenging thing is that Mexican food is very poor. And so I've learned to make my own, though, if it's a positive. Yeah, I mean, it's been great. It's been 16 years. We started the church here in Norwich from scratch about 16 years ago, and my kids feel more British than American, and so I think we're here to stay.
Wow. Oh, we're glad about that. That's great. Now, I invited you to speak to us this evening, partly because you've known poverty and debt firsthand. But I understand initially as a child growing up, you lived a fairly comfortable parents and your four siblings. Is that right? Three
Yeah,
siblings.
well, so I'm the youngest of four boys, and my mom and dad sort of began their life together in a town called Huntington Beach, California, Surf City. And it was kind of a great place to grow up at that time, Orange County, California. Very kind of up and coming, so you could move in and your house value would always go up. And so it was the kind of place that young families wanted to be in. But then my parents divorced when I was 6, and my dad took myself and my three older brothers and moved us from Huntington Beach out to a small town, a small agricultural town in Riverside County, so he could kind of start over. And so he started over, started a painting business, bought a little house on some land there. And what happened is, unfortunately, that in a very short amount of time, maybe about 3 years, his business began to fail. And so we went from relative comfort to having next to nothing. And then kind of at the end of that time, we didn't have any health insurance. And so what happened in a year's period, I had one brother who was hit by a car, an uninsured driver, and was in a body cast for 9 months. Another brother broke an ankle playing baseball, and he needed major surgery, pins put in his ankle. And then my dad had a massive heart attack. He was actually pronounced dead 3 different times in a week's term in a hospital. So I was about 10 when that happened. And so he lost the business, we lost the house. My older 2 brothers kind of moved out prematurely, and we tried to kind of eke out a living from there. It kind of spiraled out from there.
And tell us what happened. What happened next?
Well, so basically, I'm around 10 years old. We're living in what's really like a shack of a house, and my dad's trying to work 2 kind of small jobs to make ends meet. And so I'm about 11 years old, and my dad knows that I'm going to need income of some kind. I need money just for daily life. And so he lies and says to a local newspaper that I'm actually 12, so I can get a newspaper round. And so what I ended up doing is actually getting 2 newspaper rounds. I got one for the county paper in the mornings. I was up 5:30 in the morning every morning, 7 days a week. And then I had a second paper round that was 6 days a week in the afternoon. The good thing about that was it did teach me a lot about work ethic. That was a positive. And I actually was making really good money. By the time I was 14, I was making about $300 a month. That's a lot of money in 1984, whatever it was, to make back then as a 14-year-old. And so I started trying to save money, but also, unfortunately, what happened is during that time, my dad's drinking problem got worse. He always had a bit of an alcohol problem, but it was getting worse. And so because he was a signer on my bank account, he was also spending the money I was saving. And so it kind of came to a head where things got really bad. The jobs that he had weren't sufficient to support us and his habits. And so we ended up, my other brothers who were left also moved out. And it was me and him, and we ended up moving into, we snuck into the back of a store that he managed and slept on the floor. And then I did some couch surfing. And so basically we were not sleeping rough, but homeless for about 4 or 5 weeks. And that was pretty rough. That was some of the low ebb, I think, for us financially.
I can imagine, John. It sounds terrible. So here you are, a kid, $100 a month. You're trying to keep your family solvent, and yet the money is being drunk away. How did that?
Well, a couple of things were happening with me during this time. I was really struggling emotionally. Obviously, before I got these paper rounds, I was a really good student. I was in some gifted student classes and stuff. and doing quite well. And then when this happened, that all ended, and my grades got progressively worse. And so I was seeing that the only hope I had to get out of this life was to just work really hard. So when my dad started to drink some of that money away, and then when we became homeless, I felt like I was losing hope. I was losing any sort of bearing. And so I started to have a lot of problems at school as well. I got suspended 4 times in 1 year for fighting, and just was in a really bad way. And my dad, I had this mixed emotions towards my dad. One, I felt so bad because I could tell he was feeling horrible. He was incredibly deflated. Since he and my mom divorced, it just seemed like things went from bad to worse. And so you're looking at your dad and thinking, I wish I could help, but also angry because when I've tried to help myself or contribute, it didn't seem to be taken care of the right way. And so it was a really difficult time. And I think at that age, even that young age at 14, I was starting to ask really big questions about life. Why am I here? Why do I exist? And what is the point of life? It all seemed very meaningless, even at 14 years old. It was actually at that age too that I think I was driven to begin to do some of the sort of Jack the Lad type things that people do when they go into university. I was doing those things at 14. And it was, again, this sense of hopelessness and also a sense of entitlement. I work hard. I should get what I want to have. And so all these things mixed together in a pretty volatile situation. And so it wasn't easy. It wasn't an easy time to be around. So.
That would make sense. Absolutely. I mean, stressful situations like that tend to shape us, don't they? And to have a profound effect on our thinking as we carry on into life. So especially when that happens to us as a youth. So how do you think it's affected you?
Well, it's a lot of ways. In some ways I'll tie into what I want to share in a bit. But I'd say a few things. One is it really kind of solidified in me a mindset that I have to take care of myself. I have probably an overdeveloped sense of personal responsibility. And some people would applaud that. In fact, a lot of people applauded that. And so it became a sense of my identity. If I can work hard, if I can take care of myself, I have value. That's what brought me value. It also began to, with that, the kind of, I guess the flip side of that as well is you begin to look down on people who don't do that. You can be very critical towards people who don't do that. And I found that kind of creeping in as well, where I look at people and kind of think, what's your problem? Why don't you get your act together? Even though emotionally and some of the habits I had were absolutely horrible and self-destructive, because I worked hard, because I had a job or jobs, my whole identity was wrapped up in that. And it really wasn't until I became a Christian that began to change. And so that happened when I was 18. So basically after 4 years of this, my whole American high school experience was always working 2 jobs. I did pass my classes but really my whole life was about just work and buying my own car. And I moved out of the house when I was 16 and had to buy my own food. I lived with my older brothers, but I still had to buy my own food and provide my own transportation. So that kind of sense of independence and autonomy was a huge part of my identity. And that didn't change, I don't think, until I was 18 and really came to know Jesus personally.
Wow. Okay. Thank you. We look forward to hearing more. I guess if nothing else, lockdown has driven home the message that nothing in life is certain, hasn't it? We're living with uncertainty all the time, and the Bible would echo that too. And that believing in God doesn't equal a life of material prosperity. But interestingly, Jesus talked more about money than almost any other topic. So he knew it was a big deal for us. So I want to hand over to you now, John, to tell us more about that. Tell us more about what Jesus has to say about our money worries without my interruptions.
Right on.
Okay.
Well, I think I want to maybe start off by saying why I think we should listen to what Jesus says about money worries. I want to tie in more of my own story, but I want to kind of share why we should actually listen to Jesus. So I hope you guys can see the slides on that I have on the screen. So the first thing I think is important for us to recognize, and especially if anyone who's out there listening or watching this, if they might not realize that not only did Jesus talk about money, but he himself experienced poverty. There's a verse in Luke 9:58 that you can maybe look up later, where Jesus talks about how those who wanted to follow him, they needed to think about the fact that he himself wasn't sort of living at the top of the ladder. He didn't have much money. He didn't have a secure home necessarily. And so he himself personally knew poverty. But not only that, one of the things that we see throughout the scriptures, and we'll see a little bit later tonight, is that Jesus understands our daily struggles, and that they actually are daily struggles. Every day we wrestle with these things. And I want to make sure that you understand that I'm not one who's arrived and I don't have money worries anymore. I still wrestle with these things. What's great to know is that Jesus understands that. He's very clear. We see that in the scriptures where Jesus is very clear that he understands our daily worries and struggles. Also, one of the things that Jesus marked Jesus's ministry is that he always sought to help those who were vulnerable or made vulnerable by poverty as well as other reasons. And you see this in the feeding of 5,000 in Matthew chapter 14, if you want to look up that famous story, where he cared about these people that came to listen to him. He taught them, yes. He performed miracles, yes. But when it was time to give them something practical, he said to his disciples, you give them something to eat. And then he performs a great miracle, feeding 5,000 men plus women and children with one small boy's lunch. And so he's someone who sought this out. And this fits the whole sort of tenor of all the scriptures, Old Testament and New Testament. We serve a God in the Bible who really cares about those who are vulnerable, whose own definition of justice includes taking care of the poor. And so I think God understands our struggles, our money worries. He cares for these things. And lastly, one of the great pictures we see of Jesus in the New Testament is this picture of him choosing poverty. Now, that means in one sense, of course, material poverty, but also there's a spiritual aspect to that. But the point is he chose to allow himself to be poor to benefit other people. And I think that's really important when we understand what Jesus has to say about our money worries. So what I really want to share tonight is really just three main lessons that I think Jesus taught about money and how we can deal with our money lessons. And with that, or money worries. And with that, I want to tie in some more of my own personal story. The first one is what we see in Matthew chapter 6, verse 25, where Jesus says, therefore, I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more than food and the body more than clothes? And in asking that question, Jesus is wanting the people that were listening to him, people who were definitely struggling with daily issues of poverty and feeling vulnerable in their lives. He wanted them to recognize that their lives were bigger. Our lives are bigger than our daily needs. I think one of the things I experienced growing up was thinking that life was just about that. How am I going to get food to eat? Where am I going to get clothes to wear? How am I going to get from point A to point B? All these things thinking about as a very young person, as a child, really, that's what I thought life was about. And the people that I looked up to or wanted to emulate were those who seemed to not struggle with those things. And so I had this mindset that, okay, if I can just take care of my daily needs, then everything will be okay. Well, one of the things I found out really early on, even right before I became a Christian, I had a great job. The last job I had before I went off to school to study for ministry was a job in a supermarket. That might not sound too glamorous, but in the United States, you can work in a supermarket with no university education and make a really good living. A manager of a supermarket does not necessarily have to have a college degree, and they can make $100,000 a year plus. I mean, that's some serious money. And so I thought, okay, that's what I want to do. If I can get there, then I'll have my daily needs met, and then life will be what it's meant to be. Of course, I got that job. I was on the fast track towards management, even at 18 years old, because I worked really hard. and it began to feel quite empty. What if I get there? I found out that many of the people that were in management before me ended up being divorced and losing their families, or found themselves with, a lot of money, but even more debt. And one of the things that happens when we think that our life is just about meeting daily needs, what we find out is that no matter what we have, we always need more, or we think we need more. But Jesus was really clear that life is bigger than this. It's interesting because a couple verses before this, Jesus says very pointedly, you can't serve both God and money. And this is the thing that we tend to do the easiest. No matter how much money or how much material possessions we have, we're all tempted to serve money. Now, money's a great tool, but it's a very poor God. It's a very poor substitute for the God of Scripture, that's for sure. And so I think Jesus wants us to recognize, he wanted the people he was talking to recognize, listen, not that he didn't care about their needs, but that their life was bigger even than their daily needs. Now, this is the part that really struck me, and I think I should say this as well, that this section of Matthew chapter 6, this is one of the first sections of the Bible that I ever read. Having not grown up in the church, having never read the Bible until I became a Christian at 18 years old, they tell me, hey, read the Gospels. They show me what these things are. Start reading the Gospel of Matthew. And so really in the first week I'm a Christian, I'm reading these verses that I'm reading to you today. So here's what Jesus goes on to say in Matthew chapter 6. He says, look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? And why do you worry about clothes? See how the flowers of the field grow? They do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you that not even Solomon, that's King Solomon, in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. So here Jesus is talking about, look, if you just look at creation, if you just look at the natural world, you see birds, they're not stressing out about where they're going to get their next meal. You look at the fields and when the wildflowers begin to bloom, they didn't kind of put all extra effort to do that. Now, Jesus isn't denying the fact that we have a part to play, that obviously that none of us should think that we'll just sit in our lounge and wait for the fry up to fall in our laps supernaturally or something. We do need to work as much as we can. But what he's trying to say to the people he's talking to, and what really hit my own heart, was that our value is greater than our best efforts. You see, one of the reasons I think we so struggle with money worries is so much of our identity is wrapped up on what we do for a living, how productive we've been in that job, how we can provide for our families from that job. We feel like our value can be wrapped up in all the efforts we make to live the best life we can possibly live. But one of the things that I experienced, of course, firsthand was that my first experience of poverty, at least, had nothing to do with me. It wasn't me that made me poor. It was things that my choices that my father and my mother made. It was also things that they had no control over. They couldn't control the economy. My dad's business was actually a painting business, and it rained more the first year that he started that business than it ever rained before in that area, a place of California in the desert. It had rained so much that nobody wanted their houses painted on the outside. He couldn't control that. He didn't plan to have a heart attack. My brothers didn't plan to get in these accidents. My brother who got hit by the car, he didn't know that the guy who hit him didn't have insurance. None of these things were things that we planned. They were completely out of our control. So no matter what effort we would have made to fix them, they still would have happened, or try to avoid them. They still could have happened. And so there's something about the fact that God is totally in control. He's the one that makes sure that the birds can have developed so that they can get the seeds from where they get the seeds, or they can get the words from where they get the words. He's the one who's designed flowers to reproduce after their kind, and so we get to experience that beauty and that advantage to the rest of the natural world every year. He's the one who does this. And so one of the things that really helped me deal with my money worries, or maybe I should say it this way, one of the things that continues to help me deal with my own money worries is recognizing that no matter how hard I work, my value is not based on that. And because my value is not based on that, God's commitment to me is not based on that. See, one of the great things about the gospel, this good news about Jesus is that he doesn't love us because we've done so much for him. He loves us in spite of us not wanting anything to do with him. In spite of the fact that we don't acknowledge a creator who gives us every good thing, in spite of the fact that we don't always live the way we're supposed to live, whether we're the children or the parents or employers or employees, besides all those things, he still says we have value. And that value is based on the fact that he's made us in his image, and he valued us enough to send Jesus in our place to die for us on the cross. And so one of the things that helps me deal with my money worries, when I feel like, man, I wish I could do more for my children. I have 3 daughters, and they're probably getting close to marrying age someday in the near future. And I'm thinking, how am I going to pay for 3 weddings? I'm praying, God, please don't let them all wanting to get married in the same year. These are the kinds of things that go through my head, because sometimes I feel like I'm not a good dad if I can't give them all that they dream about. But that's not what God says. God says my value is not about me being this best dad or about me giving the best effort at my job. My value is based in who he says I am and what he's done for me. And if he says that his commitment, the Heavenly Father's commitment to provide for me is because of what he values, well, then I can be at peace that he will do what needs to be done. Now, Jesus goes on to say more about this issue of worrying in Matthew chapter 6. He says this, can any one of you, by worrying, add 1 single hour to your life? Can we? I mean, we all worry. All of us struggle with worrying. It's something that it comes natural to us. In this season of life that we're in, it's understandable that we would have anxiety and that we would worry about things. I might even say it's natural. But does it actually help us to worry? Does it actually help things go better when we worry? Jesus says, look, can you even add a single hour to your life when you worry? In fact, he says, don't worry, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear, or how am I going to pay for my daughter's weddings? He says, because the pagans run after these things. And your heavenly Father knows you need them. Now, this is important. And in fact, you might notice on the screen that the next words are italicized. And they are italicized because I wanted to share that this is the very first verse that I ever memorized as a new Christian, as a new Jesus follower. I didn't memorize it because someone said you should memorize this verse or anything like that. I remember reading this as someone who had maybe been, days, just maybe only been a Christian for days. I read this and I remember thinking to myself, okay, God, when I was reading this chapter, okay, God, I don't want to serve money. I do want to serve you. I do want to know you. But I got to provide for a family someday. I have to take care of myself. How does this work? And I remember coming to this verse and feeling like this is an answer. Because he says, but seek first his kingdom. That's God's kingdom, your heavenly Father's kingdom. And his righteousness. And all these things will be given to you as well. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. Now, I have to say, this brought me such an amazing peace when I read this, because I realized that a lot of the reasons we worry so much about finances are because our priorities are not exactly the way God designed them to be. Now, hear me out on this, because if you're listening to this, you might be thinking, wait a second, John, I'm struggling with money worries because my priority is to take care of my family. My priority is to make sure that they have what they need on a daily basis. How is that anything but the right priority? Well, what Jesus is saying here is that we can so trust our Heavenly Father. We can so trust God that our first priority needs to be seeking his kingdom, that would be his rule in our life, and his righteousness. Now, what he means by his righteousness there is fairly simple. What he means is that we need to seek what God says makes us right with him. Now remember, we already saw that Jesus said it's not our best efforts that make us valuable. And it's not our best efforts that make us right with God. And so you who might be listening to this and worrying about how are you going to pay your bills? What are you going to do when that bailiff comes to the door? I understand that. And Julia is going to come on in a few minutes and talk about some of the practical ways that people can help you. That specifically, people who follow Jesus want to invest and help you. But really, the priority is seeking first God's kingdom. Understanding that what we've been created for is not a life of luxury. It's not a life of hard work and labor. What we've been created for, first and foremost, is to know the God who made us. And the reason we have a hard time knowing this God is because of our own sin. There's something broken in this world that has affected us as well, our own sinfulness. And so when Jesus says, seek first God's kingdom, seek first God's righteousness, what he's saying is something has to be done about your brokenness if you're going to be able to not worry about not just money, but anything. And what he did was, after he talked about these money worries, after he continued to live out a perfect life and have this ministry of teaching, is he, as he predicted, was arrested, was beaten, was crucified on a cross. And on that cross, what he did was take all the punishment that we deserve for all the times that we failed. And he took that on himself so that we could be completely forgiven and made right with God. See, seeking his righteousness is seeking first and foremost this great free gift we can have of knowing God personally because of what Jesus has done. Now, if you're not yet a Jesus follower, I want to really encourage you to keep asking questions, to keep seeking about who this Jesus is and why you should trust him. Because this Jesus who died, he also rose from the dead, just like he predicted. And so when he says that we don't need to be afraid and we don't need to worry, we can trust him. I love the fact that it ends here in verse 34 with Jesus saying, don't worry about tomorrow. And I think all of us right now, we are worrying about tomorrow. I will confess, I worry about tomorrow. I have family in the States that are ill. I have 5 children going into adulthood that don't know if they're going to have jobs in the near future. My wife and I work a lot of hours. We have a church that's wondering, when are we going to start meeting again? There are lots of things to worry about tomorrow. But Jesus said, you know what? Each day has enough trouble of its own. And this Jesus who has shown himself to be a God who's worthy to be trusted means I can say, okay, God, today's enough. I can trust you to provide today. Some of you might have grown up saying Jesus' prayer, the Our Father, where he teaches us to pray. This Lord's Prayer where he says, give us this day our daily bread. He taught us to pray that way because it's not that God can only provide one day at a time, but he desires that we would enjoy him and know him and not let our money worries become the thing that we think about most. So I want to leave you with that. And I hope you would consider who Jesus is and how he really does want to help in these situations. Back to you, Beth.
Thank you so much, John, for some really clear and wise teaching. We really appreciate it. We want to hear more from you. It's an opportunity now to ask John some questions, take him up on some of the things that he just said. So if I just remind you, you can type a question into the group chat. You can also text it, and I'll receive that. Kieran, if you're able to put that telephone number into the group chat. So get texting and typing. And just to say again, try to type or text rather than to ask us verbally, because when we have a lot of people on the screen, it's very hard to see which screen it is talking. I'm going to start us off with a question that I've got here, John. So here it says, the worst thing for me is seeing my kids suffer. I'm willing to go without new clothes, and sometimes I go without food. but I hate it when they get teased for not having what their friends have. How do I deal with that? Any thoughts?
Mm. Yeah, I can completely empathize with that. Our kids grew up. It wasn't until they got their own jobs that they were actually, besides maybe school uniforms or shoes, they almost always had hand-me-downs. And thankfully, most of the people they ran in circles with didn't tease them too much. But I always felt guilty about that. And I remember this is one of the reasons I got in so many fights in school, was because if I got teased about something, even if it was minor, it would just set me off. I think just to encourage this person who's asking this, I want to say that's a great heart that you care about your kids, that your heart breaks for your children. And I would encourage you that that's the Heavenly Father's heart for his children. He does care about the fact that we do without. I think there's probably some practical things that Julia will talk about where you may be able to find help with that. But I would encourage you, and again, I don't know who this person is. Obviously, I don't know if they're a Jesus follower or not. But I would encourage you back to that first point that Jesus made, that our life is bigger than the stuff that we have. That this is a good chance for you to teach your children something about what's really important, your relationship with them. I know now that my kids are older, we talk about sort of our favorite memories, and none of my children's favorite memories revolve around special treats or a new Christmas present. They all revolve around silly things we got ourselves involved in, or dumb arguments they got in about things, or the time that we as a family served together in some way. Those are the things that really were important. So as painful as this season is for you as a parent, and difficult even for the children, this could be a chance for you to really teach them about what's even more important than these daily needs. So I hope that doesn't sound trite or discompassionate, because I know that's a tough situation.
Okay, thank you, John. Here's a question referring to one of the points you made about our value. So the person says, thanks, John. During lockdown, my productivity has greatly decreased, but I fear I'm simply being lazy in my work. How can we know that our value is greater than our efforts when we fear the consequences of idleness?
That's a great question. That's another great question. Laziness is a real issue. I think we weren't created to be sedentary. We weren't created to do nothing. God did create us to be those who are productive. So it's good that we would feel like I should be busy doing something, or I should be doing something useful. That by itself isn't bad. I think the problem is when we think that we have to be able to quantify how fruitful or how productive we're actually being. Sometimes we just can't. How productive we're being, or if what we're doing is actually productive. I mean, this is my life as a minister. Sometimes I don't know if the things that I'm doing are actually going to bear any fruit. John Hinley's shaking his head in agreement. Yes, it is a difficult thing. So I guess what I'd say is this is something that you want some really close accountability for. So go with somebody you trust and share with them your daily schedule. Here's what I'm spending my time with. Maybe even a couple different people, and try to choose people that aren't just like you. I tend to be a bit like this person, it sounds like, where I want to get a lot done all the time. And so I really need my wife, who's a lot more laid back and casual about things, to kind of tell me when I'm working too many hours, or when I'm worrying about too many things. So being honest and accountable to somebody who knows you well about, well, here's what I'm doing with my time, I think is good. There's always things to do. I don't know if this person is asking this questions local, but I got a whole church that needs to be weeded and painted if you're really bored. So you can always come along and do some work like that if you're that bored. There's always things to find to do, but the issue is not so much about being productive all the time. It is about saying, what are the good works that I'm supposed to do today? What should I do today? So if there's some accountability, then I think people know you're going to know, yes, you're being lazy, or no, you're just worrying about doing too much. And I guess one more thing I'd say is, don't forget, if this person who's asking this question is a Jesus follower, don't forget that who you are in Christ is what makes you valuable. Go back to that. Go back to the fact that you are a son or a daughter of God by faith in Jesus. And if this person's not a Jesus follower, man, please talk to somebody. We'd love to have more of a conversation about him with you. So.
Okay, thank you, John. We'll be sending information about how to reach you as well later. Another question here. Someone says, we're not in debt, but we often live just beyond our means and go in and out of our overdraft. I know that it's because I compare our lifestyle with our friends who are generally better off, and I get embarrassed saying we can't afford to go out with them or on holiday with them, etc. Any advice on how to manage this and the discontentment and the bitterness that accompanies it?
Oh, that's another great question. And that, again, I could have wrote that question myself, I think. I get that completely. Yeah, we've struggled with this, especially when we go back to the States for a visit, which isn't very often because it's very expensive. And so, in fact, actually, it's usually some like miracle that we actually get to go back and visit when we do get to go back and visit. But we'll go back, and so many of our friends are in such a, well, they have more money than we do. And so they want, hey, let's go here. Hey, how about we take the kids to Disneyland? Sure, my 5 children, $160 a piece for tickets. There's no way we could do that sort of a thing. And so it puts you in an odd situation because you're afraid if you say something, one, you're embarrassed of that, but also they might feel obligated to help you. It's really, really, really tough. I think the first, and again, I think Julia might speak to some of this stuff, but I think one of the first things we have to do when it comes to how we spend the money that we have is to, one, recognize it. It's really all a gift from God. That everything we have comes from God's hand. It all really belongs to Him. It's just, in a sense, it's a loan from God. And then I'd say the second thing we need to do is really watch where we're spending. And then it's one of the wisest thing that someone advised me to do, and I put my hand up and say I'm not perfect at this, but is to try to stick to a budget. If you can get on a budget, stick to a budget, then it's a little easier, I found, to say, sorry, it's not in the budget this month. And that sounds a little less, I don't know, maybe a little less, you're able to keep that privacy there, and it sounds a little bit less like, like you just don't want to be with them or something like that. When it comes to the bitterness of heart, I think we have to go back to the fact that, the God of the Bible is a God who's sovereign. He's in control of all things. And the good news is that God in His goodness gives us what's best for us. I may have less than a lot of my friends in America have. I get paid a lot less than a lot of my pastor friends in America do, that's for sure. But I probably get paid a lot more than my pastor friends, or some of my pastor friends in Great Britain do. And so the thing is, a lot of this can be proportionate. And I found that one of the things that helps me from getting bitter is to remember that the money that God gives me, or the resources that God gives our family, those aren't just for us. Those aren't just for our benefit. They're so that we can help other people. So looking for people to help, even in your poverty, even when things are tight, having a budget first, making sure you can do that. I think that really helps free us from some of that bitterness that can creep in.
Thank you. That's great. Well, look, we're going to have a little break in our questions to you, John, right now. Although please feel free, guys, to keep writing your questions in the chat. But we're now going to hear from Julia Morrish. I said before, she works for the charity Christians Against Poverty, and she's going to give us some information about how we can access help and receive support if we're struggling financially. So Julia, over to you.
Hi, so lovely to be here. I work for Christians Against Poverty, as Bev said. We're a debt counselling charity, and we're passionate about lifting people out of debt and poverty. So there's 3 different parts to our CAP work. We run a debt centre, a job club, and a CAP money course. So I'll just give you a little bit of information. And we believe that God loves and values every person that we meet, and we really want to show that love by helping people in a practical way. So my job is I work in the debt centre. It's based in Surrey Chapel, usually, so not at the moment, we're at the moment doing phone calls, but usually we visit clients in their own homes. And that's just great because we get to know the families and we're able to help practically with sorting out all the paperwork and everything that we need to help them. So my job is to collect the financial situation and pass it to head office. And in head office, you've got financial experts that then put a realistic budget together and advise on a really clear route out of debt. So they give the family a plan of this is how we're going to help you to get out of debt. One of the best things about CAP, like we were saying earlier, that often when I meet people, they're having lots of phone calls, lots of letters, even bailiffs, enforcement agents knocking at the door. CAP take over all of that communication and negotiate payments with the creditors. So I always say to clients that they're here and the creditors are here. CAP stand in the gap and just take over all of that communication. And gradually all of those letters and phone calls stop to the client. And that's just a huge release of stress for clients to have that. We're able also to do emergency food shops. Often we meet people and they're really struggling with having enough money to buy food and to top up their gas and electricity meters, so we're able to help with that as well. And then we stick with you, both myself and head office, till you're debt free, which is great. So CAP support over 200 clients every month to go debt free, and the service is completely free, which is great. So in 2016, CAP did a survey of clients called the Freedom Report, and this is just some of their statistics, which is amazing. So 93% of clients that worked with CAP remain free of debt 5 years after, which is incredible. Demonstrates that the debt advice works, and also that clients can stay more in control of their finances after working with CAP. I love the one as well that 62% of clients passed on the skills they learned through CAP to others, which is just brilliant. Not only is it just changing the way they look at their finances, but they're helping other people as well. So we also run a job club. A lady called Dawn runs a job club on Tuesday mornings at Surrey Chapel. So they run an 8-week Steps to Employment course. There's 2 job coaches available, so they can help give one-to-one support. And it's a really practical environment. So they're looking at interview techniques, CV writing, motivation building and confidence building. It's in a community setting, which I think clients find really helpful. I know that Dawn has said that clients, even when they found work, pop back to see the team and other people that they've met to keep in touch, which is brilliant. And every Tuesday they share a lunch together, which is great. And here's just some quotes from some CAP clients. So I love that, where I was very limited and closed and said, I've done this all my life. This is all I know. Job Club opened it up for me and gave me hope. And another one, I'd recommend CAP Job Club for the friendship and the specialist help that they offer. So then the third strand of our CAP work is a CAP money course. So this is a budgeting course. So this is for people who just want to feel a little bit more in control and aware of where their money is going. Again, it's a free course. It's run over 3 sessions, and a lady from Surrey Chapel called Christina runs it. Again, delivered in a small group setting, but there's no expectation for you to discuss or share your personal finances with anybody. You can just work independently through your budgeting. But Christina, who's a trained money coach, will be there to give you one-to-one support if you would like it. Again, you just learn really practical skills. So like John was saying, I think at the start of thinking about your money, just to work out the money that you've got coming in and everything that you need to live on, and even then to try and start saving. So it looks at all of that and gives you the skills to be able to do that. And as often there is with CAP, there's delicious puddings provided, which is great. And some quotes from some CAP money clients. I don't worry about the future. I can enjoy spending the money I have now. And I know that I've budgeted for everything. So this small pot of money to treat my family can be used without any guilt or anxiety. So just understanding where your money is and to have some leftover that's been put aside for a little treat. It's just so much more enjoyable to spend it then. So that's just my details. So if there's anything there that you think is helpful to anybody here or anybody that you know, please get in touch. So there's my name and my mobile number, and we're here to help you. We'd love to help you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Julia. Really inspiring. Wonderful to see a charity doing such significant work and bringing hope in the midst of despair in many situations. Thank you. CAP is a national organisation, is that right, Julia?
Yeah.
I'm aware there are people listening today who aren't local to Norwich, but that information, that 0800 number, you can find a centre near where you live. Okay, well, another opportunity now to ask questions. If they're related to the practical things, I'll direct them to Julia, but if you still have questions for John, please do type them up now. I've got one to keep us going. Julia, do you have advice on how to teach your kids to budget?
Okay, so I think involve your kids in talking positively about money. Again, show them that you've got a budget, that you're aware of the money that you've got coming in, that you're aware that all the bills that you need to pay for. Tell them that you need to pay for bills at certain times and try and pay those bills on time. Things like getting them involved perhaps in the shopping list, and when you're going food shopping, explain to them this is the amount of money that we've got to spend this week on the shop. Work out what you can buy, what you can't. Maybe get them to look at deals, get them to work out what deal works out as better value. I don't know whether this person who's asked the question gives pocket money, but maybe if you've got any money left over, just to give them a little bit of pocket money to teach them responsibility for money, perhaps to teach them you can either choose to buy this now if you've got that much money, or you can choose to save up so that they can get into the habit of saving up for something. And maybe just trying to be positive and seeing money as rather than a negative, and that you're anxious about it, to show them that you can be in control of it.
Okay, thank you. That's brilliant. We've got another question here as well. You mentioned this about paying bills, but do you have any tips on how to prioritise bills?
I guess again, just if you know how much money you've got coming in, so sit down and write down everything that you've got coming in, and then add up how much all your actual bills cost you. So perhaps not including your food and your leisure and clothes, but your council tax, your gas, your electricity, your water, your rent, all of that. I guess if your money that you've got coming in isn't covering your bills, maybe you can have a look at how you can get those bills down a bit, shop around for your gas and electricity. I know we do that every year, and we reduce them quite considerably. Perhaps look at TV packages. If the money you've got coming in does meet all your bills, see how much you've got left over, and then work out how much can we afford per week or per month on clothes, and make sure you've got the money for the bills first before you do the other things.
Great, thank you. Thank you, that's very helpful. I don't have any more questions. I'm not receiving any more at the moment, so I don't know if anyone wants to squeeze one in before we come to a close. You've got a moment if you'd like to. No, okay.
Sorry, can I just say one quick thing? There was a question earlier about having money for children. Just a really practical thing. In Norwich, there's an amazing charity called Thomas Anguish Charity, and you can apply to them, and they will give you vouchers for school uniforms at the beginning of every year, and there's an amount per child, which is brilliant. And they also will pay for children's school trips. So if you're struggling to pay for a school trip, you can apply to them, and they will fund that or give money towards it.
Wonderful. Thank you. That's very helpful to know. Really appreciate that. John, anything further that you want to add to any of those questions? You're muted at the moment, sorry. Sorry, John. Were you saying something profound?
Yes, and now I've forgotten, so it's lost forever. No, in all seriousness, just thanks for having me. And if anybody has any questions who about Jesus, who's watched this or listened to this, I'd love to talk to them.
Great, thank you so much. That's wonderful. Okay, well, yeah, as John says, if you haven't had your questions answered, or if perhaps this idea of trusting God, or the idea that we have a more serious debt than a financial one with God, perhaps some of those ideas are very new to you. As John says, please do get in touch. After this is recorded, we'll go onto YouTube and we'll give you information from our website, also about CAP and also John's church, Servants Church. But we'd love you to get in touch. We could talk to you one-to-one. We could send you a free Bible. We could put you on an online course to get together with others who are exploring the Christian faith. Those courses are going on at the moment. This can be a great way to find out more. So please do get in touch if you'd like to do that. Also, there's never been a better time to find out what goes on in a church service. So from the comfort of your own living room, you can turn on your laptop, your TV, go onto YouTube. Surrey Chapel puts services up at about 9 o'clock every Sunday morning. There's some fantastic input for children as well. And again, you can find all of that on the website www.surreychapel.org.uk. If you've enjoyed this week and you'd like to join us for our next session, that's going to be in 2 weeks' time. So not next Monday, but until Monday, the 13th of July. And I'm going to be speaking to John Hindley. He's going to be telling us about some of his experiences with depression and how he found God and his comfort in the midst of the darkness that he experienced in that. So come and join us again in 2 weeks' time for that. So it leaves me to say again, thank you so much to John for your clear teaching this evening and for sharing some of your story with us tonight. Thank you too for your thoughtfulness, answering questions. We really appreciate it. Thank you too for Julia. Really appreciate the input you've been able to give us tonight as well. So thank you. And to the rest of you, thank you for joining us and have a very good evening. Good night.